right, so for our final SOFA session for the program on shared perspective, we will be inviting two driving forces behind creative economy development and strategies to reflect on everything that they saw, heard, and felt during the WCCE 2021 and draw lessons for the future of our global cultural and creative industries. Please welcome to the stage John Howkins, global strategist and author, and joining him is John Newbegin, OBE, founder and first chairman of Keriietf England.
When John and I were asked to do this, which I thought was a great idea, I said, it'll work as long as we find something to disagree about. So.
And the full impact of looking through what a creative economy means. So that's, for me, that's been a high point in this week. But other things, what I've enjoyed about the last few days particularly is the range of topics and themes addressed in different ways and at different levels. So we've had some great examples of creative practice. I thought the presentation about the heritage, all the heritage work in Bahrain was absolutely fascinating. And for me, the presentation about junk couture, young people involved in using material that's destined for landfill to create something beautiful, is absolutely the core kind of story that the creative economy ought to be about. And I was absolutely delighted that there was a session on creative culinary skills, because it's always seemed to me cooking and eating is core to our way of expressing our creativity and our cultural distinctiveness. So that was great. There's been a lot of sessions about the things that we need to do to underpin the creative economy. So I thought Joachim Zaidan on blockchain, fascinating, the potential impact for some of these new ways of thinking about how we manage and control intellectual property and money is going to be crucial. The session earlier today from Ufa, from Tunisia, and Laura from the US on finance, that's absolutely crucial. And then I like the fact that there's also been discussions on strategies for education, and the great session we had here on the first day on this stage about the strategy for the UAE with a target. Let's get this up from 2.5% of our economy to 5%, and a real kind of vision and some genuinely pioneering ideas like a freelance visa or a collective management agency. These things are really important. So I thought that spread of issues and the way they've been dealt with has been excellent. And then underpinning that, of course, we need the narratives as well. And there's some narratives that we're familiar with. STEM to STEAM is a good narrative. Moving from oil as the way that the global economy is driven to creativity as the fuel that drives the global economy. That's a good old narrative, but these narratives are important, and I loved the narrative expressed by the employment minister when he said Dubai is moving from a seaport to an airport to a brain port. And you think that's a lovely line, but I think getting those narratives right to convince people about where we're going and where we need to get to is absolutely crucial. And of course, while we've been talking down here, today there's been a meeting of culture ministers. My understanding is 23 culture ministers from 23 countries talking about how we take this agenda forward in a practical way. That is hugely important. And the fact that there's going to be another conference of this kind next year in Indonesia is important. But Here comes the but, and then I'm going to hand over to you. But I think where we ought to go next with this conversation is, this is the second iteration of the WCCE. We've just had the 26th iteration of a climate change conference in Glasgow, and we're still struggling to get to a real inflection point on climate change. Maybe we're there already, but it's still a matter for discussion. So we're at the second World Conference on Creative Economy. We've got a long way to go, and we haven't got very much time to get there because of climate change, because of the way we're using the resources of the planet, because there's an absolute crisis of youth unemployment, because our education system needs to be rethought from the ground up. So we have some big, big challenges. So I found this week inspiring and really exciting, but I think we absolutely need to drive forward from this, not just wait another year for another conference, but how do we build in practical ways on all the fantastic ideas and inspiration that we've had during the course of this week. And the point about diversity, which we've all been talking about during the course of this week, I thought that one of the quotes I like, Yo-Yo Ma, Chinese-American cellist, with an extraordinary orchestra of musicians drawn from all over the world. And one of his lines is, creativity happens when cultures overlap. And where better for that to happen than here, where so many cultures overlap in this city and in the UAE and at this event. So I think that thing of how we build really actively on the overlapping of cultures to drive forward a practical creative agenda, that's the task that we still have to do, enjoyable as this week has been. Is that the same week you were at?
That's the same week I was at.
So we haven't disagreed yet.
No, we will, don't worry. No, I agree with everything you say. I wrote down some words here trying to sum up my own feelings. But actually, before I do that, I'm going to say you're right about exchanging cultures. And as you said that, I was thinking of Picasso, who in his mid-50s, just after he had drawn those wonderful Voila Sweet Prince, which were completely wonderful, he immersed himself in African art. He collected a lot of African art, and you could see this coming through in his work. So echoing what Malcolm Gladwell said, Picasso went out of his comfort zone and immersed himself in a completely different culture to give himself a new burst of energy, but a new aesthetic as well. The words I wrote down that seemed to me to sum up my own experience are inclusive, diverse, honest. I've been very struck by the level of honesty and straight speaking and almost personal confession that the speakers have shown, but also that I'm getting out of the conversations I'm having with other participants here. With a lot of trust, multicultural, and I think something that struck me as someone who's come to the Emirates for the first time. I've met many people who've come here, who are working here, who see it as a safe haven. And they refer to COVID, of course, but they refer to it as a place where, wherever they come from, whichever culture they are part of, whatever ethnic group they belong to, they feel that they can come here and be themselves and do good work and meet an extraordinarily wide range of diverse people. And that struck me very much. It's not specific very much to the conference agenda, but I think it's a characteristic of the country we are in, and that has shaped the overall agenda. One thing that has struck me very much is the emphasis on the visual, both in the expo and in the conference. And I think if you were coming from Mars and coming to this conference and knew nothing about the creative economy, you would think the creative economy is all about the visual. The visual was totally dominant, with a bit of performance around the edges. I was very struck by a remark that in terms of the Emirates working together, Abu Dhabi does literature and Dubai does the creative economy, as if words and literature are not part of the creative economy. And I think the way that John and I have been trying to make sense of it over the years, and John in particular has worked with very many countries around the world, the creative economy is a very big tent. And it's not just the visual. We all know why we like the visual. It crosses language barriers, crosses many cultural barriers, doesn't have to be translated. This is why architecture and design are the most international industries that there are, and foreign architects can work very happily in a culture where they do not speak the language. But there is as a result of this, there is a tendency to put a huge amount of emphasis on the visual. And we have to remember the other elements and genres and activities and forms of expression and enjoyment that we get that are not visual. One of the questions that I've been asking, John's been asking, I think others have been asking, is, how to define these things? How to define the creative industries? What's the meaning of the creative economy? I think this event has shown me that it's all the definitions we have are probably too narrow.
Yeah.
They don't include innovation. I do intend to innovate. I do now include innovation, but some people have a problem with that. So we need a bigger understanding of what's included. But having said that, I think that there is a common characteristic of what we're talking about, which is the link between the person doing something and the work that is being done, that link between the person and the work that's being done. And that came through very clearly to me. And it came through in a rather self-conscious way, which I found rather good. I don't think we've quite looked at the future of work enough. We've looked at it. It's a huge topic. We need to look more at it. I wrote down here what happens next.
Yeah.
And I know Indonesia happens next. But as John said, I'm agreeing with you too much.
Okay,
John didn't say that. I have met some extraordinary people here, people I never knew before, as well as old friends, and I've made new friends. And I don't want to lose touch with you all. And I would like, if in some way we were able to sustain the links we've made and maybe to congregate in groups and work on topics that we were interested in over the next 12 months before the next event. I have a tendency to parachute into a place, spend some time there, never enough, and then I leave. And that's the fact of life. We all do it. It's always slightly irritating. What I like to do is to have continuing contact. So if in some way the WCCE can have a continuing activity, visibility between, not just between the events, but continuing, I think if that's something that the organizer of this event and the next event, Indonesia, could look at, that would be very welcome. It would mean that we aren't just coming here for 3 days and then disappearing. I'm going to finish by just saying this has, to my mind, been one of the most remarkable events I've ever been to because of the level of personal interaction. This is partly the set, 3 stages, lots of meeting places, maybe sometimes a little bit too much loud music, but there's been a tremendous buzz, and I've enjoyed walking around and meeting people that I've not met before and having conversations. So I think that's my main takeaway. And I'm so glad I'm here in presence and not being beamed in from somewhere else.
Yeah.
I think hybrid conferences actually don't usually work. They're very hard to get right. We do need to get together physically. And I think the joy of this is my first get-together in 2 years.
Yes.
It's my first international get-together.
Yeah.
I did have a moment of hesitation about a month ago. It was only a moment. I'm so glad I came. I'm so glad I came. And I want to thank the organizers and everybody who's made me feel at home here. We do need to get together to look each other in the eye. I have a thing in my new book about the future of work about being able to feel vulnerable with other people. And I think in my book it's about a workplace where you're vulnerable with other people. You need to work somewhere where you can feel vulnerable with other people. And I have felt open and vulnerable with other people here, open to anything, open to discussing my personal life, my ambitions, my dreams. And you can't do that on Zoom.
No.
It just doesn't. The technology isn't there yet. It's not about to be there yet. The metaverse will not help it be there yet. And coming here and being here with you has been a wonderful, I use the word intimate, it's not quite the right word, but a close and very friendly relationship. And I really enjoyed it, so thank you.
And well, John, more agreement. I do think the UAE is to be congratulated for having the courage to go ahead and organize an event like this with all that is happening around the world, with renewed dangers of the pandemic, new mutations of the pandemic. So the fact that it has been a real life event for all the reasons that you've just said, I think is wonderful. You mentioned Picasso, and Picasso, I wanted to say this to Malcolm Gladwell. Right towards the end of his life, somebody said to him, "Your pictures look like they've been drawn by a 5-year-old." And he said, "It has taken me 60 years to learn how to draw like a child." And I think that's an expression of the fact that we all have a kind of innate creativity in us. And of course, as we grow older, we have to learn how to channel and use that creativity for productive or not destructive purposes. But I think that's a lovely statement.
It's a lovely quote. I initially wrote a very long presentation for this morning, and yeah, the trick is, this is Picasso, it was cut. The trick is to remember how to be a child.
Yeah. Well,
and he also said something which I think is wonderful. He said, "Bad artists copy, good artists steal." And I think I like that because there's something about a creative person who is serious, as the examples that Malcolm Gladwell gave us here, that they're ruthless about doing what they want to do in artistic terms. They're absolutely ruthless. They're very focused, and as Picasso said, they will take stuff from anywhere. Picasso took it from Africa. Paul Simon took it. Everybody borrows and is stimulated by what they borrow. And the interchange between the artists is going on all the time, and it works because people, to the extent they are successful in their own terms, is because they are ruthless. They want to do this. They don't, as I said this morning, they don't wait for permission. They will do anything, go anywhere, interrogate anything, steal anything, do anything with anything. One of the joys about the cognitive work, of being creative, is it's all in your head. You can change your mind. No need to tell anybody, no need to ask permission. You can change it back the next moment. You can put it on hold for a day, come back to it the next day. You are totally in control. And this dedicated, focused, ruthless nature of being creative and moving forward and being creative and moving forward is, I think, it's a universal characteristic of the creative person.
I want to talk a little bit about where I think WCCE might go next, because I think it's important that this isn't an event that we all remember as a great week and then don't do anything about. And I'm reminded, because Indonesia is going to be carrying this forward next year, and of course the Indonesians have been central to this whole idea of this year being the year of the creative economy's contribution to the Sustainable Development Goals, that in the mid-1950s, when the world was very much divided between capitalism US style and command economy Soviet style, that 4 or 5 leaders got together in Bandung in 1955 to have a conference about an alternative way of running the world's economy. And it was Sukarno from Indonesia, Nasser from Egypt, Tito from Yugoslavia, and Nehru from India. 4 unlikely candidates from different parts of the world got together when the world was dominated by 2 powerful ways of organizing everything to say, we want to create a different kind of economy and a different kind of relationship between our countries. And that was the birth of the non-aligned movement.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that we're at a point where we really do need to think not just about what the creative economy is and how we define it, as you said, John. And I had a conversation with a regional economic manager in the English Midlands the other day, and we were talking about this definition, and she said, you know what? The creative economy is a state of mind. And I think that's a fantastic definition. It's a state of mind. And we need a new state of mind for the global economy, not just about the industries that we've been talking about this week, the industries that depend on intellectual property and so on, but the work that you've been doing, John, and others have on rethinking work. And this idea that we're moving into a time when many more people are working informally, partly because of the growth of the gig economy and casualized work, partly because digital technology enables people to work in completely different ways, because we're used to working informally. The governments around the world are still operating on the assumption that most people have a wage job for a company which is paying its taxes, churning out the same stuff every year, selling it to somebody. That is not the way the world economy is going. Creative or not, creativity is driving every part of the global economy. There's this huge crisis of youth unemployment, or potential youth unemployment. In Kenya, average age of the population is 18, the average age. So what that means is, while many parts of the world are becoming older, in Africa, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, there's this huge potential for creative growth or for disappointment. And we've got to be thinking about how we deal with that. And with the 4th industrial revolution and machine learning, artificial intelligence, the way the global labor market works is changing absolutely radically. 100 years ago, agriculture was a huge, or 150 years ago, agriculture was a major employer. 50 years ago, industry was a major employer. But these things are no longer true. Where output goes up, it's because of technology, not more people. Car factories now, 100 people and 1,000 robots rather than 20,000 workers in the first Ford factory. So we have to be thinking about different ways of engaging ourselves. And what we do know is that this is an area where because the idea is more important than the product, and again, stuff that you've written about, the idea is more valuable than the product. To have an economy which is based on ideas, of course we still need products, we still need chairs to sit on and food to eat and clothes to wear, but actually what's going to drive sustainable growth in the global economy is going to be how we develop creative ideas and how we express those to each other. And I think at a time, in so many different dimensions, because at a time when globalization feels like a continuing threat, despite all the changes of the last few years, and arouses so much skepticism, this way of celebrating cultural distinctiveness as a way of contributing to global economy rather than being the antithesis of global economy. These things are really important. And so how we take forward some of the lessons from this week, for example, the freelance visas here, what a great idea. And what a brilliant idea for the UAE. It's going to be a point of competitive advantage for the UAE, but other people are going to start copying that, which is good. And once more countries start copying it, then we have to kind of rethink that. So there's a mixture of competition and cooperation. And again, that's something which is very familiar in the creative economy, where people talk about co-opetition, because lots of small, informal workers are used to working together and also in competition with each other. And maybe that's a good model for the WCCE, that it's co-opetition, that it's people learning from things like the freelance visa or the collective management agency here, people learning from some of the tax breaks in Canada, or some of the quite radical and pioneering legislation that we've introduced in the UK to help grow the creative sector. These are all things to build on. And we need to build on them, because also this week has been dominated a bit by the discussion about fragility and resilience. And we all celebrate the resilience of the creative economy here because we all believe in it. But actually, it is very fragile. And it's fragile because most of the financial institutions in the world still prefer to invest in things that are physical rather than intangible. They like to have collateral for their loans. If you pitch up and say, I've got a great idea, they will not invest. If you pitch up and say, I've got a great idea and a house that's worth £1 million, they might lend you some money, but it's the house they're interested in, not the idea. And many governments now pay lip service to the creative industries and the creative economy without really thinking through what that means. And we all talk about making great education systems that are more creative, but my God, there are very few of them in the world yet. And in my country, we're going in the opposite direction at the moment. We're leaving the arts and going back to a kind of 19th century idea about learning, which is totally unfit for the 21st century. So there are these big agenda items, and I think learning from each other and competing with each other is the way to take it forward. And what I'd be interested in is whether out of these few days, there are some practical working groups, if you like, to develop some of these initiatives so that when another conference is held in Indonesia in a year's time, there is some real progress to report. And we don't wind up, like the Intergovernment Panel on Climate Change, having 26 conferences before real change starts happening. That's what I'd like to see happening, and I hope you agree with that and don't disagree with it.
I agree with that. I like groups, very focused, reporting in a year's time. There was a moment, and my brain is weakening slightly over the last few days, but I am increasingly worried when people say we want to have like 3% of the population, 3% of jobs, 4% of jobs work in the creative economy or increase output by whatever, because to my mind, as the creative economy becomes more productive and more people want to do it, then it's harder to draw a boundary around it.
Yeah.
And
it becomes the economy.
I think we're getting to the point where anybody who does any work that they want to do, where they can express themselves and contribute something to the work that only they could contribute, that is now not only in the specialist creative industries, but is in a much wider range of work activity. So it seems to me that the focus is moving, the spotlight is moving from a relatively small but significant group of industries into the kind of work that everybody could do. In other words, the real impact on the creative industries is not on arts and culture, but is on the nature of work, and back of that is the nature of life, because we live before we work. And you can't actually envisage the kind of changes in the nature of work that I'm talking about, without envisaging also significant changes in the way that people live and where they live. And back in that is the nature of education. My own feeling very strongly is that every country in the world probably puts too much emphasis on universities and not enough emphasis on childcare, primary school, kindergarten, and secondary schools. All the education systems that I've looked at, some I've advised on, are guilty to me of that fault, that over the years they have wanted to produce the group of highly trained, highly educated, expert graduates. And that's a great target. And in many countries that target's been hit, or it's been hit as much as it will ever make a benefit. And by default, the resources, the energy, the attention and the prestige of working in schools, and in primary schools in particular, I would like to see a huge switch of resources into early years primary, kindergarten and secondary schooling. And so I think there's a change overdue in education and learning. I prefer the word learning. There's a change already underway in the nature of work. What it is, where we do it, how we do it, and why we do it. This question of motive, I think, is really important. And then part of that is this creative instinct, this aptitude to want to look around the world and say, I could do that. I could do that better. Or I want to do that. That will give me pleasure. It's interesting to me. And I think other people will find it interesting and pleasurable and fun as well. And so in a way, it's reversing the order of play from like, these are the industries, how do we protect them, to a new attitude towards humanity and education, schooling, life. As part of that is work. And inside that is this kernel of creativity. So in a way, I think government policy is critical, but it's more than, or we need more than the current ministers responsible for the creative industries are able to give it. Because it's not just about the creative industries anymore. No. It's about your whole population, your children. Your figures about the demographics of these countries are staggering. We all know that the young people want to work in particularly those that go to university. They come out, they want to go on using their brains. They want to go on using their minds, their imagination, their talent, their ideas in a way that will be really recognized by their contemporaries and their bosses. And if they can't get those jobs, they are very frustrated. So I think there's a bundle there of issues. They're policy issues, but they're also sort of social issues. Yeah. That it would be great if this organization, with the ministers, thought, yes, this needs to be looked at on a continuing basis.
Well, I agree again, but one of the things that interests me is that much of the real creative energy that's recognized around the world comes from creative cities. And we've talked about that. Why are cities creative? Because, as you were saying in your talk earlier today, that's where there's a diversity, there's an inbuilt diversity of perception, of prejudice, of understanding, of different kinds of skill, and that makes for a very rich mix. But it seems to me it's easier to make change happen at a city level, because at a city level, you can integrate thinking around economy, environment, and people's sense of belonging. People take pride in their city.
Yeah.
I mean, in London, so many people I know say, I'm a Londoner. That doesn't, whether they're British or whether they're Indian or whether they're Siberian or whatever, they're Londoners. And people can identify with a city. And cities have made much more progress on environmental sustainability projects than national governments because they're dealing with real issues. I was doing some work with some mayors in the West Balkans, and they all got on very well together. And they said, because we're all dealing with the same thing. We're emptying the bins. We're keeping the streets clean. We're trying to make it safe for people to live. They're dealing with the realities of life, so they have to be real. And I think it's that integrated thinking that we don't have one bit of our life as a worker, one bit of our life as a parent, one bit of our life as an athlete, whatever it is. We live integrated lives, and it's finding ways for structures that work at local, national, and international level that recognize that. And the thing that we haven't addressed is, it seems to me, the other huge issue in the world is inequality and a growing crisis of inequality. And the traditional initial understanding of much of the creative industries was the kind of Richard Florida hipsters in a Starbucks cafe in New York, and actually digging into it, the stuff we've been doing with the PEC International Council that we were talking about on the first morning, is that in many parts of the world, the creative work is what is accessible for women, for young people, for marginalized groups. And again, a way that the world economy is changing, one of the projects we came across in our research was a group of women weavers in villages in India, most of them illiterate, who formed a co-op. The co-op's done a deal with IKEA worth $50 million for an 8-year output deal for what these women are producing. So they are illiterate villagers connected to a global supply chain. That's the kind of possibility that we now have for the economy more generally. And it combats inequality. It increases opportunities for people to have worthwhile ways of expressing their lives, all the things
I
that
hope they're getting a good contract and shares in IKEA.
They're getting
on a collaborative basis.
They're getting a good contract because there's an intermediary body that's negotiating.
Don't want any more exploitation by Northern European companies.
Yeah. But I think it's I think it's that kind of, it's recognizing how radically different the possibilities for people to earn a reasonable and worthwhile living now are.
Yeah, because it's often not for people in that situation, it's often not the creative talent, but it's the distribution and the reach and the marketing and the sales and the publicity and the PR.
Creativity is not about the product, it's about the whole process.
It's about the process. We can talk forever, us two.
We will do.
But we don't have a system set up for questions, but if anybody wants to ask a question, we can probably hear it. So if anybody wants to put their hand up and say something, we might even see you. Otherwise, John and I will just go on talking. Because I think what's happening, and we talked a little bit before now about what we would say, but we didn't really prepare very much. But we are together here now, focusing, I think, on the big and widening, growing range of creativity and innovation, the very wide range of work that's being done around the world, the fact that it's no longer in a silo, but it's something that is common in particularly cities, it's an urban phenomenon, but also the countrysides. And this has been recognized here, and it would be wonderful if this host and next year's host looked at this on a continuing basis. And they will know how best to do that. But I think there are some major issues here that cross most of the international, intergovernmental discussion platforms. It's not just UNESCO, it's not just WTO, it's not just WIPO, it's all of them together, but it's also somewhat different from all of them. And the creative economy globally has a lot of national and regional initiatives. It does not have a true world, global, international platform or group yet. And I think one of the ideas that's coming out of what John and I are talking about is that there should be something like that. And it would be great if that was one of the results of this 3-day event here. It would be really wonderful if that could happen. John and I can't make it happen. We would support it if it were to happen. But there are people in the room and outside who could make that happen. And I think that would be like letting out a huge burst of energy that we could all participate in.
Agree. I mean, yes, I was going to say, yeah, you have a question.
Come to the front and speak loudly. Is this going to work? I think this is going to work.
Okay, so I'm really interested in your emphasis on education. And education being the place you need to start in order to reinforce the creative economy right across. What would you do? Bearing in mind we still live with this CP Snow, two nations. We still live with this two nations in education, the arts and the sciences. What would you do at that early stage in order to encourage more creative thinking right from the roots, instead of splitting us off into arts students and science students, and there the twain shall meet?
Well, I would just speak from my own experience, which two things that I come back to again and again in talking to people about their own creativity is to give them confidence and to give them a sense of responsibility of what they do. I went to a school where, at the age of 8, I was asked to write my own half-term report to my parents. And if you're given responsibility at that age, you take it, you like it. And we all took it very responsibly. And so it forced me to examine what I was doing, to account for myself, to articulate what was working for me, what was not working for me. And it also helped me to not only to take responsibility for what I was doing, but it gave me, in a funny way, gave me the confidence to take risks. Because I was in charge. I was in charge, age 8, of my education. Every morning I walked down before breakfast, we all did, and we chose what we were going to do that day. And it was up to us. And so we could choose art, geography, whatever. Now, it was at a good school where if I fell off, mentally speaking, or whatever, there'll be people pushing me up. I was being looked after, but in a very discreet way. So this is a sort of a state of education before the split into disciplines and the arts and the science, which has plagued education systems around the world. So I would just say, give the child confidence to play and give them responsibility for their actions. Give them confidence and give them responsibility. And that can start at home, kindergarten, primary, secondary. And so it's much more focused on the individual's dreams and ambitions rather than curriculum. When people talk about the curriculum, my eyes glaze over. Yeah. But John,
I mean, I think that when the world is changing so fast, technology is changing so fast, jobs are changing so fast, we have to be constantly learning how to learn. And at an early stage, and come on to a later stage in a moment, but at an early stage, a child doesn't think, am I doing physics or am I doing art? They're learning, they're experimenting. If they're experimenting with some chemicals, that's an experiment. If they're experimenting with some colors, that's an experiment. and it seems to me the role of the teacher is to encourage the child to explore and experiment, well, obviously within bounds of safety and common sense and all the rest of it, and learning how to interpret that learning so they can go on building on it, and how they can share that with other people. To have, when employers are saying, you know, we want people who've got social skills, who know how to work together, can work as part of a team. But in school, if you work as part of a team, it's called cheating. It's absolutely crazy. It's completely back to front. And I think that this business of learning how to learn, being able to have the confidence to express your own creativity and appreciate the creativity of other people, which is as difficult as expressing your own, because that's where teams come from. That's giving way to other people. These are all skills that we need to learn. With a group of friends, we edited a little book a few years ago called Creativity, Money and Love, on the basis of the fact that the three things we all need for a happy life are creativity, a bit of money, and some love. These are three things which most education systems do not begin to address. Learning how to live your life, how to manage your money, how to look after yourself, how to engage with other people. These are important skills, and of course, there are practical cognitive skills that can be developed through disciplined learning as people get older. But I think this thing of learning how to learn and being able to do that all through your life is something that we all need to do. I feel increasingly completely out of my depth with an awful lot of what's going on in the world at the moment, because the technology is changing so fast. And that's going to be more and more true for more and more people around the world.
Yeah.
So that's what we need to be thinking about with our education system.
Can I mention, there's a phrase which is particularly relevant, I think, because it was developed by an Indonesian journalist and educator and minister called Suchitmoko, who was the first rector of the United Nations University. And when Indonesia was developing its independence as an independent state, he developed this phrase, the capacity to learn. He was offered money for infrastructure and dams and buildings and roads. And he said, no, what I want to do is educate the people, because that's by far and away the most important quality that we have. The capacity, he wanted to enhance the capacity to learn. He applied it to the entire nation. I applied to any social unit. So I applied to companies, I applied to families, I applied to schools, any institution. I actually, this is stretching it some way from Suchitmoko, but I applied to individuals. So I think this is still an answer to the question, but I think it has resonance beyond that, which is that how do we develop our own capacity to learn? What is the role of the school in helping us develop our own capacity to learn? How do we do work which develops our own capacity to learn? How do we move and live in a neighborhood, a city, where the community has a capacity to learn? And this concept of a capacity to learn seems to be one of the richest and most inspiring concepts. And the fact that it was developed by an Indonesian, I think, is particularly relevant here because of next year. Now, the time is up. John, should we leave the stage gracefully?
We should do. I just wanted, just as you were talking, John, I got to know a head teacher of a school in the north of England, in an ex-mining town, very poor community. And over the gates of his school, he had a sign which said, every day, everybody has something to learn and everybody has something to teach. And he said that included the teachers as much as the kids, because very often the kids understand digital technology better than the teachers. But of course, the teachers know many things much better than the kids. But his idea was, even from an early age, learning and teaching can be a mutual process, because the kids are teaching each other and learning from each other. And I think, trite though that might sound, that's quite a good model for us to be thinking about the WCCE.
I love that.
Everybody has something to learn, everybody has something to teach. It's not a matter of kind of experts in the creative economy. It's a matter of every country, every city is developing new ideas all the time, and it's by sharing them and exchanging them that we grow this economy and also grow ourselves as individuals and grow ourselves as a global community that works like a community, which is what I hope we all want. We didn't disagree about anything.
We didn't.
Thank
you very much.